Okay, I'll try to speak in a low voice so I will not wake you up. Right. You had a marathon of presentations with a lot of information. I'll try to skip whatever was already presented in previous talks. What I suggest to discuss today with you is the defense part. And the previous presentation was quite good for introducing into this subject. And I will ask you to do very simple gymnastics, just to raise your hand if you are responsible for security in your company, directly or indirectly. Okay, so just a few hands. That is because a security operations center is really like a F-35 fighter jet. Until you start flying it, you have to do quite a lot of training. All right, just a few words about us, just to jump at the subjects. We are a cybersecurity division inside a company called CertSign. We registered a private cert for incident response called UTI Cert. And we did it from scratch from 1.5 years ago. Managed security services, basically, from consulting to operational security and incident response, which is quite a challenging task to do. My theme today is about defense side, and we worked in the past, let's say, more on the defense, on analysis, on incident response, on forensics. I will just skip this side, not brag too much, and just introduce, let's say, the main topic. And I could just stop at this slide and say that attack is easy, the defense part is hard. This is a hacking conference, everybody is quite excited about the offensive part. But what I invite you to think about is that the industry, the companies that would hire security professionals and security experts are mostly looking for good professionals that will understand also the defense part. Because if you know how a system can be hacked, that does not necessarily mean that you also know very well how to defend it, how to implement proper defenses. And I'll start with just an overview of why we are here and why this kind of problem exists, and end up with two practical demonstration that if you are responsible of security, you can implement them in your company. So just a few words about the problem, because it's quite late and I will try not to bore it too much. At the topmost international level, the cybersecurity is recognized as a serious risk. That is a systemic risk. In a study by World Economic Forum that looked at all categories of risks, cybersecurity risks are considered systemic risks. What does it mean? It means that a small change in this risk posture can have influences and cascade into all kinds of other risks. The higher likelihood and impact is, of course, with cyber attacks, but there is also data fraud and theft and critical infrastructure. And you've been through presentations these days covering this kind of aspects. Also, United Nations did similar research, but not necessarily on risks, on all categories of risk, but specifically on cyber risks. And of course, we saw different kind of attacks, different kind of factors that influence this category of cyber risks. And the largest one, at least for private companies, is consistently compromised computers. That is because, for instance, for public companies, and this is usually highly publicized, is data theft. For now, the private companies have the the breach inside them as the main risk factor. Now, this kind of dynamics are thought, and all the policies from national level to European level and so on are thought on the longer terms. And when you look at a factor on the longer term, you look at accelerators and inhibitors. What can aggravate this kind of risk and what can decrease it? And one of the accelerators is, of course, the ecosystem, the cybercrime ecosystem. And the truth is, I really wish for you not to see or not to be to have intimate knowledge of how much money can be made on the dark side, because it's like, I don't know, it's like Sauron. It's a malefic attraction that you hardly can resist when you can realize that you can make from 10,000 to maybe 1 million a month doing illegal activities. And the worst part is that the ecosystem is booming, is an underground economy that is booming, and law enforcement is striving to counteract that. And I've been in the past years different law enforcement conferences, and unfortunately I left all the time with a bitter pessimism because the technical knowledge and capabilities are quite low. The international collaboration is really not working. Takes years to even close I don't know, 100K damage case and so on. So these are all accelerators. Moreover, a lot of people working in this dark side, let's say probably at least half of them, have absolutely no technical knowledge. This is the worst part, because there is room for entrepreneurship. It takes very little money to start this business. You don't have to know much, you just have to have that kind of sense for making money easy and taking, of course, the legal risks. And when we see prices for credit cards or for botnet renting going down, that means one thing, and you don't have to be a graduate of economics to understand that on a market where the prices go down, it means what? That actually the supply goes up. And the supply goes up because there is a growing market. There is, of course, competition, and I recall years back when I used to work at Kaspersky Lab that we were presenting, for instance, cases where malware infections, first thing they did on a certain machine was just to search for whatever other malware was there and remove it. Just make sure that they don't have competition on that machine and so on. So this is another accelerator. At local level, we are not shielded from this event. Romania, when we see all kind of security reports, isn't necessarily there. We don't hear about big cases of millions of losses. We are more like a transit country. Because of infrastructure, a lot of our servers are used to attack other companies. But there are quite a lot of active botnets in Romania as well. That means there are a lot of infected computers as well. That means somebody is making money out of them. And here is just a recent view from a threat intelligence feed from Anubis networks of some active botnets, very recent data in Romania. So this is just another accelerator. Why is that? Or what would be the root causes for that? Well, on one hand, it's the defense gap, what we call defense deficit. And this is inherent to this industry or to this field. And the saying is that cyber favors offensive. That means that it's far easier, and the forces are asymmetric between offense and defense. Far easier to attack than to defend. Worse than that, companies ideally would pay zero money on any kind of security, right? If you work for any kind of company except in security, and you ask your bosses or the executives about security, how much money would they be willing to invest? Truth is, they would want to invest zero if possible, or $1 if possible. They don't want to invest in security. They just don't want the risk. They want to invest in whatever they are doing, milk factory, machinery, agriculture, whatever. This is why we also say that security is pain-driven. It's exactly the mindset of you have when you go to the doctor. Ideally, you will not go to the doctor at all and pay no money and do no analysis. But you have to do it at some point because you feel sick. It's the same thing, but it's a different scale. And the detection deficit stems from this asymmetry. And if we look, this is from the famous study of Verizon data breach incident report. Throughout the years, there was always a gap between the time of compromise and the time of discovery of the compromise. Regardless or notwithstanding all the advances in technology, detection technologies, architecture, anti-malware and so on, there was always this gap. And one of the causes is because defense is really hard. It's tackling complexity of a larger scale. And as one IRA terrorist said in '84, we have to be lucky once, you have to be lucky always. This is actually, unfortunately, the mindset of the defender. You have to make sure that you are right all the times. And this has actually prompted a new wave of thinking that you may have heard recently, which is called somehow oxymoronously offensive defense. This is just an expression of our frustration with this complexity of defense. We get attacked and compromised from all directions, and we would definitely like to attack somebody. Let's hack back. Whom? I mean, this is another factor that affects, that favors offense. Lack of attribution, and this is a holy grail of the security industry. And companies like, famously now, a bit ironically, Mandiant pointing to China, or I don't know, CrowdStrike pointing to Russia. It's really hard to do attribution, it's really hard to do actual offensive because you don't know exactly who to hack back. And even when law enforcement tries to take down botnets, they struggle through a lot of legal mumbo-jumbo and legal barriers, maybe crossing them a little bit like Dutch police that simply disinfected botnets and the computers that weren't outside Netherlands, that crossed a little bit the legal boundaries. So this is another accelerator, the defense gap between offense and defense. Another defense gap is what truly stands for security. It's not about technologies, it's about people. This is, I believe, this is why you are here. You want to learn more, you want to get better at your skills and abilities. And unfortunately, a lot of companies have a difficulty of understanding that for good security, for good inside security, they have to have a serious investment in formation of their security people or contracting the right security services. There's another recent survey. Security responsible persons were asked what would be the pain areas for them. Where do they lack most the skills? And it was performing forensic analysis, determining the root cause, using these tools and so on. So these are actually some basic things. As you saw in the previous presentation, which was quite good, we have the knowledge how to organize this kind of security centers with all the procedures, with all the formalities, and so on. And there was a good question here in the first row. That person asked, okay, so how do you make sure that all those procedures do happen in the real life day by day? But I felt that the presenter didn't quite catch the question. This is actually an issue. And it happens everywhere. You write procedures even for development, for whatever else. Is any programmer in the room? Quite a lot, okay. Do you follow the product requirement description, definition? Yeah, exactly. Right, so, or you just go through some use cases, do some requirements, and then forget about them, go back to coding. Unfortunately, this happens in the operations as well. There are some procedures that are written somewhere, and then you go just pick a sword and go fight them. But this is a real gap, and companies have an issue with abilities as well. From the basic things of evaluation, even to implementing a SIEM. I would not dare to ask how many of you know that your company has a SIEM, or what is a SIEM. Because unfortunately, there are a lot of companies that simply do not implement this very basic technology of monitoring, correlation, and alerting. Another defense gap, unfortunately, this time is on our side, security people, is the mindset gap. And it may be because of the complexity. We postpone implementing patches and updating the systems because of fear of losing the whole weekend or next 2 weeks fixing stuff that simply broke. But unfortunately, looking at the trends, a lot of CVEs throughout the time are still being exploited or are exploited over long periods of time. Even high-profile attacks seen in the wild do use even 1 year, 2-year-old exploits. And this is because we fail to patch, we fail to keep the security up to date. So this is not related to skills or security investment, it's simply about security hygiene. Moreover, it's not only about, and this is another mindset problem, it's the outside guys, especially, okay, Russia and China, attacking us, and everybody inside is a good person. If you look at this study done by Forrester, 34% of the attacks were actually originating from inside. That may mean insiders, or that may mean employees clicking on stupid cat videos or whatever. But this is another problem, and it's a mindset problem, and it's also an architectural problem. And I'll address it a bit further on and introduce maybe, if you haven't heard of, zero trust model and what does it mean. To complicate the things, of course, as the technology evolves for security measures, the attacker or the adversaries advance their skills as well. And another aggravating factors are this concept that outside are the bad guys, but inside we are doing okay. So this is called strong, or how to say, tough outside and soft inside. And unfortunately, if you take a list of, I don't know, of 20 high-profile APT campaigns in the last 3 years, and look at the compromising vectors, 99% will be some sort of spear phishing, right? This is how they actually begin. Waterholing is just an indirect form of spear phishing. But they just target directly inside your citadel. You may have the toughest UTMs and firewalls, whatever. If that employee clicks on a link, they're already inside. And moreover, you may have sandboxing and anti-malware technologies, but they already kept pace. And recently, we saw a surge in this kind of attacks. At least the serious malware already uses anti-debugging and anti-VM techniques. So it's no longer just firing up IDA and just hit F5 and, oh, this is it, this is the IP, everything is very clear, 5 minutes. Not at all, or just sending it to Cuckoo Sandbox and there it is, all the indicators, all the URLs, all the IPs, and we've done our job. Unfortunately, it got complicated because, let's remember, these guys are making a lot of money by using our infrastructure. So they want to keep growing their business. Moreover, unfortunately, antivirus vendors and security vendors or OS vendors do not keep up the pace either. We just made a test recently, Cosmin just showed in one of our internal trainings a very simple PDF mangling with the Metasploit payload, bypassing half of the antiviruses on VirusTotal. And that was, I think, 2008 or something.
2010.
2010. So if that is possible, that simple technique is possible just to trick an antivirus to not see a payload in a PDF, imagine a very determined attacker how easy it would be to just bypass AVs. And the same goes with the vendors. And if you are familiar with the pass the hash and all the related attacks that are easily coded in Mimikatz, that is actually a structural or architectural flaw in how Microsoft thought these services. They are trying to address it right now, and I think this summer at CodeIgnite, they released a product called Microsoft ATA that is specifically designed to catch this kind of attacks against Active Directory. But it's still a problem, and I think 99% of the companies still do not have proper countermeasures to this kind of attack, which is quite direct against the AD, and from there we have the keys to the kingdom. And there's more. Unfortunately, there's even more. Why? Again, because they're making money out of it. We see attacks using PowerShell or VMI interfaces. We see different methods of exfiltration through unusual protocols, or maybe right now they are quite usual. And if you talk to security people, they will just install some AV, put some UTM in front, and think they are doing quite okay. Why is this relevant? And we saw even with so-called senior CSOs, they didn't even realize that there is malware out there that simply exfiltrate over HTTPS on Google Drive. How do you catch that? You have to think a little bit further. And to complicate the matters, even if you do some sort of HTTPS traffic inspection, there are still techniques to hide the outbound connection through different addresses if you use a hidden Tor service. And this is already quite advanced attack or technique that doesn't really have an easy solution. So on one hand, we have, let's say, a structural problem of defense, a mindset gap, a technology gap, an abilities gap, and a race that is always trying to catch up. We have a defense deficit of catching the attacks. What does it mean? If we are to look on the longer term, it can only mean one thing, that defenses will be harder and harder. But on the other hand, hopefully, the executive level will realize that this will impact their business reputation and financial losses as well. So let's have a look at some very simple defense fundamentals until we get even more practical. And these are just some recommendations. I'll try to skip what was already presented in previous presentation. The starting point should be, okay, not an exhaustive list of things that you need to fix. There are very good guides like Sun's top 10 security controls, and they are quite actionable. If you look them up and see the guiding for implementing those controls, they are not that complicated. It's not an ISO of 200 pages that you need to read that is very boring and no command line there. It's quite actionable, and this can be a very good starting point. From segregating the roles, doing asset inventory, and so on and so forth. So this is a very simple thing. I call it step one, to know at least what are the best practices in your industry if you are responsible for security. And best practices involve both, let's say, policy approach, but also technical approach. And from the technical approach, if you are not familiar, I advise you to get acquainted with what the intelligence-driven defense means, what zero trust model means. If you have a security operations center, you are already probably in the very lucky 10% of the companies. Another very good practice is not to have only a response team, but to have a hunting team that would look for potential indicators of attack in the network and so on. So getting to know the best practices is the first step of enlightenment and better security. A second step would be what previous presenter also said, to know what assets you have in your company and know them programmatically. That means you don't have an IT audit meaning actually an inventory, once a year just to see where are those lost laptops nobody can find. Or where is that server that answers to ping, but nobody can find it. Something like this. It's having them integrated in systems that are continuously discovering and can point out exactly what you have in your company. And of course, to assess them, to see how they stand from the security point of view. And there are very good security software for that, for doing them on a continuous manner. Continuous vulnerability management, that means to know exactly all the services that are being exposed inside and outside. Moreover, once you do that, you know what are your assets, you know what are their current vulnerabilities. You need to do at least once a year an exercise of threat modeling, because not all the vectors are relevant. As you may very well know, there are published vulnerabilities that do not get exploited. Or writing a POC for that is quite expensive in terms of knowledge and time. This is on one hand. On the other hand, not all the assets in the company are most valuable. You have to start where it hurts most for the company. And there are methodologies that are quite simple to follow, like ideal ATC from Lockheed Martin, that are quite, how to say, common sense. You just split them in system, look at attack vectors, and then implement the proper measures, triage, control, and so on. And lastly, and this is a really difficult thing to do, but is one of the best things you can do in a company, either with the simplest CM you can find on the market or with solutions like ArcSight, we will show a bit later on, is to do proper security monitoring. Implementing a CM in a company simply gives you a dashboard so you can know what happens there. And this process can take somewhere between half a year and 1 year. Why? Because you have to do like what the previous speaker said. You have to define what you want to monitor, what are the cases, what are the data sources, ingest them correctly, correlate them correctly. But after that, you have a dashboard you can simply fly with, because you have real-time alerts and you can actually react and close that defense gap between 200 days, the average time between a breach and detection, and probably to several minutes or hours. And of course, it's also, again, it's about people, and training people and forming people for monitoring, analysis, and triage is quite difficult, and there are unfortunately no such disciplines. And when we look at the industry, at the universities, there is actually no seriously thought track for education on forming this kind of profiles of security professionals. What to say more? That monitoring without enrichment with threat intelligence is halfway through. One thing is to see that, I don't know, from net flows you see a considerable traffic to some IP address that doesn't tell you anything. You just look it up and who is it? Some server somewhere, maybe on Amazon cloud. And totally different thing is to have the information from a threat intelligence feed saying potential CNC or known botnet server. That is an immediate flag that you have an infection in your network. And this happens by integrating this kind of feeds, and we will show an example just a bit later on. And of course, you have to not wait for an incident to happen. There are stages for preparing for that. Moreover, threat intelligence, unfortunately right now, is spread over several standards, but they converge somehow. Of course, the most used one is right now is OpenIOC or IOC format, even YAML or simple text, right? Some IP, some MD5. But there was a consistent effort by Mitra organization, which is a non-profit American organization that works with DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to define these standards, all those standards with dark blue, that help capture this kind of information. capture information about the objects, the cyber observables, the actors, the method, and the attributes of manifestation of malware, and threat actors inside the network. So you can easily share this kind of information. And sharing in the security community is very important because it allows and enables others to act on this kind of information. I'm not saying that you have to go through all these standards, but at least get acquainted with Cybox, Stix, and Taxi, for instance. And I will just skip that, as previous presentation already spoke about organizing a SOC. It takes a team, it takes the skills and the full organizational steps. What happens most often is, as it happened with TCP/IP, there was a body of standardization working out all the details, and there was the industry taking up the most practical part, which was the 4-layer TCP/IP. The same happened with OpenIOCs. The persons responsible with doing incident response just pick up the indicators and starting and develop their own way of doing things. And this is a very simple methodology proposed by Mandy, and actually they mostly formalize it some or put it in words. Is just finding a lead during an incident response, capturing under one form or the other the actual indicators, and working of discovering others, going to next stations, and drawing up the map of an attack. So that was just a brief overview of the factors, why the problem is so serious, why defense is hard, what would be the basic security fundamentals for defense, and we'll get to the main theme of this presentation, which is to give you an idea of how you can start bettering up your security with a very simple thing, which is monitoring your DNS requests. And I do advise you to take a look at Zero Trust model. It's quite simple to understand. It was formalized somehow by a senior analyst at Forrester, that basically says, do not look your internal network as secure. Segment it and treat each segment as a totally different network. Do not trust any server to talk to any other server, but make sure that you authenticate inside as well. A corollary to that would be that if this kind of internal network is to be seen like any external network, then we should make sure that we monitor each and every component inside. And one very simple, very handy way of doing that is by monitoring DNS requests. Why? Because any malware needs to connect to some CNC or some intermediary step, right? Intermediary server. Hard coding IPs is not very efficient because they are easily blocked or easily blacklisted and shared with a security community. So they will definitely use some sort of trickery there to connect to their server. And we will look at two cases: a domain-generated algorithm, which is another way of tricking the exit guardians, and very simple thing as checking a blacklist in a threat intelligence feed. Moreover, as I said earlier, DNS can be exploited for other things. For instance, for data exfiltration. You can transfer quite a lot of data simply over DNS outside from the company. But we will not cover that one in this presentation. So let's get practical and see a first example of using DNS for integrated with a SIEM. Why so? Actually, I forgot I have this one, this slide. So this is a very simple view of how to think your internal network in terms of what was called microcore perimeters. So if you do this kind of segmentation and treat each segment as being a separate network, you can implement controls at each checkpoint inside your network. So each service has to authenticate to any other server internally as if it would be any external client getting inside. And why is that important? As I said, because And why to look at the DNS? Because in the DNS you can fit anything. You can transfer, even if you think, okay, DNS is just few packets. No, actually, you can fit inside the DNS even larger animals, right? All right, so this is the mandatory cat picture in the presentation. So let's have a first demo, and I'll ask my colleague to walk it through.
Thank you, Theodore. So for today, I prepared 2 demos. One of them, actually the first one is integrating threat intelligence into ArcSight. And I have a question for you. How many of you know what is threat intelligence and if you use it? Okay, only 1%, a few. Okay, in my demo I use ArcSight and collective intelligence framework for threat intelligence collection. Collective intelligence framework is an open source tool, and I think it's very, very powerful because it allows me to collect information from many sources, aggregate it, making the duplications. And after all of these things, I can generate some threat intelligence feeds. In my demo, I generate only a few minutes because I want to show in the video all the steps. Actually, you can use collective intelligence framework with any other CM solution. We use ArcSight intern, and also we offer services based on ArcSight solution. So, is that please?
Scusa.
So, first of all, I will show you how I send the DNS logs to the ArcSight. This is the first. Okay. Okay. For that, I create I create an active channel, and like you see, all the logs are now in the CM.
Just a second, maybe, to explain what the demo is about. So everybody understand what is ArcSight, what is a CM. Okay, it's a monitoring and correlation solution where you get all the logs from everything, from window system event, from your firewall, from your Exchange server, postfix server, whatever. You don't get absolutely everything. You just get the logs you need. It gets collected into a CM, and the CM does some correlations, looking at the events, looking at what assets were those that send the events, and so on. And based on this kind of correlation, it can raise alerts. It can be a simple alert like you have a connection to a CNC server, but it can be more advanced alerts like this external IP does a lot of IP fragmentation. And by the way, you also have a connection from your proxy server to some internal network at the same time. So it can correlate several types of categories of events and raise an alert for you. What we will show is the simplest way you can do this kind of security monitoring by integrating a threat intelligence feed, which is a feed in different formats. Most of the time it's comma-separated value, but you can find it as XML or so, that contains IPs and domains known to be bad. There is an open source framework called Collective Intelligence Framework that you can use it from tomorrow that collects this kind of information. And the point of the demo is to show how you can integrate this kind of threat intelligence feed with a CM. And in this case, the CM is ArcSight, but you can use Splunk, you can use even Logstash, Kibana, and Elasticsearch. You can use QRadar, Logarithm, SecAlert, and so on and so forth. All right.
Okay. One mention. ArcSight are using 2 main concepts, active channels and active list. In order to make some correlation, all the events must be collected in active channel or in active list. So, like I said earlier, I send all the DNS logs to the ArcSight through an active channel, And now we have all the logs in the CM. Okay, after that, we must create an active list for threat intelligence. All the information that we collect with collective intelligence framework are sent to this active list. There are a few steps. First of all, we must define the active list, new one, set a name, customize all the details, the retention period, the capacity. For those of you which are not familiar with our site, I think is a little bit too boring, but I think it's very useful. Okay, after that, we'll create the fields, because if the data collected from a SIF has some fields, and our site don't know out of the box how to interpret that data. Okay, one of them, the domain name is a key, is a mandatory one. In fact, the source, all of them must be strings. The confidence is very important. Basically, it's a value determined by an algorithm. This algorithm is implemented in a collective intelligence framework based on the values, the confidence values from the sources, from where you ask, from where we collect the data.
By the way, moreover, what you can do is get Alexa top 1 million domains, yeah, and input them in SIF and say, this is confidence, this is risk level 1. The higher the risk, the more probable that it's a malware domain. So you can actually whitelist known good domains and blacklist. Here in ArcSight, what we'll see is that we will treat the domain as malware if it's above 85. I'm not sure you can see that, but this is the point here of defining. The active list means we will reload it several times. This is why it's an active list.
Okay, after that, we must create a rule to populate this active list. It will be a standard rule. Actually, this rule parse all the information of which are coming from the SIF, and a little bit further we'll see that we develop a Python script which help us to automate all of these steps. Okay, we create a new condition because we must know the device name, which will be SIF, the name, SIF malware domains, and I think I should go a little bit further. The actions, very important is to deactivate the on first event trigger, because in situations like this, the correlation rules will go into the circle, and we don't have any results.
So how a CM works is that as soon as a rule that is defined in the system matches, that is called the correlation. It's an event. What we want is that as soon as the domain matched, and that turns into a correlation, not to match once again and once again and once again. This is the idea of specifying this kind of setting. So what we are configuring here is where to get the domain list from. This is the active list. And what are the rules that apply when checking any kind of incoming event, and where do we need to have events from? The DNS server, right? So the DNS server has to send us some events that will contain a domain. And when an event comes to the CM, events come over syslog, either syslog format or CEP format, which is very similar. So we have the CM. There are a lot of events coming from different devices. One of them are related, some of them are related to DNS. Okay, it's a DNS event. It contains a domain. Can I match it into my active list of bad domains? This is what we are configuring here. If it matches, then we raise we have a correlation, and then we'll see further on what we do with it.
Yeah, actually, this is the rule for population, and we have another rule for
Ah,
correlation.
here is for the
Yeah.
compilation, for the configuration of the rule.
Yeah. After that, we must move the rule to the real-time rules category.
Okay, so here
Because-
we just created the rule.
Yeah, and now we'll generate some threat intelligence feeds. C4 is a
Collective
it is
intelligence
collective
framework.
intelligence framework is a command line tool. It doesn't has an
And you don't see
interface.
anything because it's very small white on dark black. So we can maybe skip that and
Yeah.
just say a few words. So this is simply exporting with the command line tool from CIF
To a CSV file.
to a CSV, exactly. And then we will just send the CSV with the Python script to the CM like any other logging system that was sending something to the CM.
Okay, after that, because we want to send alerts to via email, for example, we create a destination. And this is the correlation rules for events matching the bad domains. So, like in the previous rule, we must define the event, the category, and after that the actions. The actions will be a little bit different because we must to compare the results from those two active lists. The active list from the DNS part and the active list for the collective intelligence feed. Okay, I will skip this part because I think it's a little bit too complicated. Now we'll set the action to send the message. Yeah, here we configure some local variables because the CM doesn't know how to parse all the information, and it must to analyze every line from the active list. And for that, it's like for structure in programming. Okay. And now this is the final step. Here we'll make a ping to a malicious domain, and we'll see how fast the CM will trigger an alert. And now it is.
So
Okay, we have the alert in the dashboard.
So on the first line, you'll see the trigger alert as soon as the log from the DNS server reached the CM. It triggered the alert regarding the IP address and the extra information that is malicious. What is the feed?
And what is the source of the information?
And what is the source?
Yeah, and after that we'll receive an email with this alert and all the details regarding this event. Okay,
what is more is that you can actually trigger different kind of actions. For instance, you may trigger to cut from the firewall or UTM any kind of traffic that is already going to that IP address. So this is simply sending an alert on email. But what you can do is that as soon as you see that there are some computers in your network asking about a certain domain, just make sure nobody else already connected to that domain. So you can configure any kind of other actions. That is a fast forward demo with very small letters on the display, just to show that actually implementing a threat intelligence feed into SCM is probably 15 minutes. 15 minutes where you define an active list, define the mapping rules, define the trigger conditions, and the actions.
And this means to be proactive in the network security monitoring. Actually, I think, is my opinion, threat intelligence would be, I don't know, for the next 2-3 years, the future in cybersecurity. Without threat intelligence, we can catch malware and the attackers, and we'll only find the compromised systems in our networks.
Right.
But we can't block it. I will go further to the second demo. It's also about network security monitoring, and I will show you how to catch a known malware in your networks with Bro and ELSA. I use the Linux distribution Security Onion, and I customized there some dashboards. And from one of our investigation, I have some traffic sample. Okay. Okay, I will log into ELSA. ELSA is the dashboard utility in Security Onion.
Isn't anybody using Security Onion? One.
You are my colleague.
Right. If you're not, you should have a look at it.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, like I said, I customized a dashboard. It's an overview dashboard which allow me to view all the activity in my network. Practically, I use Bro in this demo. Bro is an IDS, intrusion detection system like Snort or Suricata. And I have a big sample from investigation from a malware which used the domain generation algorithm. Do you know what is it, domain generation algorithm? Okay, this is a trick. Domain generation algorithm is a trick used by the malware developers to bypass the monitoring systems or the, I don't know, let's say passive DNS. If you are familiar with passive DNS, that malware, this malware bypass also passive DNS, because we'll see it use some request to another DNS server, not from that infrastructure. Okay. Practically, the domain generation algorithm generates a lot of DNS requests to the server, to the DNS. And when he touches the CNC domain, we'll have practically the callback to the server. And after that, we'll download the payload and we'll compromise the system. Okay, we see here that in our infrastructure have a lot of DNS requests. Practically, those of you which are familiar with network security monitoring will see very fast these things. And this is a trigger for you to make an investigation in your infrastructure. Okay. Also, we see some snort alerts, but they are not related with the malware that I use in this demo. Only I include some traffic samples only to show you that not all the time IDS systems help you to identify very fast malware, and you must make some manual investigations, and and you must have the correct mindset. Okay, there are a few alert snort alerts, and also in the graphic we see a lot of DNS traffic. So we conclude that we have a problem with the DNS in our infrastructure, and after that we must go further to see what happened in the infrastructure. First of all, we want to see the top NX domain, practically the domains for what the request was made. And here we will see something strange. Do you see the domains? Okay. So practically we have here all the domains generated by the malware. Not all of them are alive. So I think
For some reason,
this kind of.
so for some reasons,
This is a Mac. It's good only for hacking, not for playing videos.
I don't know where it got hidden somewhere.
Yeah, I think you have a backdoor.
All right.
Okay. Și poți să play?
Got stuck. Anyway. Q-time, nu știu de ce nu mai merge.
I think this was
Okay.
the most interesting demo.
I hope. Okay.
Okay, if the video doesn't work, I will tell you what happens in my demo. Actually, we see that we have an infection in our infrastructure, which is not related with the snort rules. Actually, the malware makes some DNS request over TCP protocol on 53 port. And this is not a normal behavior. It is a normal one. And this also is a trick used by the malware developer to bypass the monitoring solutions like passive DNS. Because with passive DNS, we will monitor only the DNS request made over the UDP protocol over and 53 port. If you are interested in network security monitoring, we can continue the discussion in the break in the next room.
Yeah, well,
because my video has a problem. I don't know what's happening.
The point was to detect that there was a huge traffic of DNS requests, identify the domains, and then take measures. That was basically, and showing that you can do that with security add-in, another free solution that you can use from tomorrow. So just to somehow wrap up, we all know the saying of trust but verify. Actually, if you verify this saying of trust and verify, you'll realize it wasn't said by President Reagan. It was just a Russian proverb that was taught to him. So do not trust anything. The old mantra should actually turn into never trust and always verify, especially your traffic. That would be all. Thank you.